Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam Koslowski.
I'm Emma Gillespie.
Adelaide Crows star Izak Rankine is set to miss a number of matches that could rule him out of the AFL finals. This comes after he used a homophobic slur against a Collingwood player during their match last weekend, and it's the sixth homophobic slur incident in the AFL since April of 2024. On today's podcast, we're going to dive into the incident itself, the wider sporting and social context dominating conversations in the sport only 2 weeks out from the season's final series, and what happens next.
Sam, we're talking today about this homophobic slur incident in the AFL, but before we get to what happened, let's talk about the player at the centre of this controversy. Now, for myself and novices alike, I had not heard about Izak Rankine until this incident. I am not really an AFL girly, but it's certainly a story that's been dominating headlines, so I really want to understand more. But tell me about Izak Rankine, the player.
Well, I think it's fair to say that if you are an AFL fan, but also if you're from Adelaide, you would know the name Izak Rankine.
Okay.
He's a 25-year-old forward and midfielder for the Adelaide Crows. He's considered one of their best players. He spent his first 4 seasons at the Gold Coast Suns before he made the move to Adelaide in 2023. He's one of their highest paid and most marketable players. So the type of player you would see on a poster as you drive through Adelaide or fly into Adelaide Airport. Now, many AFL observers say that this year has been his best season in the league. And if we look at the team in general, it's fair to say Adelaide is the best team in the competition right now.
Okay.
They are top of the ladder and they're set to play in their first final series since 2017. They haven't won a premiership since 1998. So for a football mad town like Adelaide, this is a really big deal and a very big time of year.
Okay, so we're talking about a really high-performing player on the most dominant team on the ladder this season. He's having a great season. The club's having a great season. But this isn't really a story about football.
No.
It's not a story about how high-performing a player he is. It's about something much more sinister, right?
Yeah, so during Adelaide's match against Collingwood on Saturday night last weekend, it's alleged that Rankine directed a homophobic slur at an opposition player. The AFL's Integrity Unit launched an investigation, and on Tuesday night, Channel 9's Eddie Maguire reported that Rankine's season is over. His theory there is that the AFL is set to hand down a 5-match suspension.
Okay, so why would a 5-match ban be so significant for Adelaide at this time?
Well, Adelaide, as I said, is sitting on top of the ladder. They're heading into finals. There's 1 match left in the regular season. Then they have a maximum of 4 games in the final series: the qualifying final, semi-final, preliminary final, and then the grand final, obviously assuming they make it there. So what that means is that a 5-match suspension would rule Rankine out for the entire finals campaign. And for a team with their best shot at the trophy since the late 90s, that is a big blow to the club.
Okay. Now, of course, this is all context for the media storm that has ensued around this incident. It's not necessarily excusing any of the alleged behaviour, but I think it's helpful to understand this side, certainly for me, kind of being an outsider, understanding all of the controversy and hype around this decision. That finals context is certainly critical.
Yeah, and you and I had a chat about that before we came in to record this. It felt funny to start this podcast with an explanation of the football side of things. But as you say, I do think it's important in placing this story in the context of the discussions that we're about to have.
Yeah. Pausing there, though, specifically about the Izak Rankine decision, this isn't the first incident of its kind when we're talking about the AFL, is it? No,
and that's also important context. So this is the 6th recent homophobic slur incident in the competition. And the pattern shows that escalating penalties, so a 5-match ban, a 6-match ban, isn't actually working. So the latest string of incidents began with Port Adelaide player Jeremy Finlayson in April of last year. He received a 3-match ban. A couple of weeks after that, Gold Coast's Will Powell got 5 matches when the AFL explicitly warned at that stage of further consequences for other players who would be found guilty of something like this.
Okay.
Then this year we had Saints player Lance Collard. He got a 6-match ban. West Coast Eagle player Jack Graham got 4 matches in July. His ban was lower because he self-reported the incident to the AFL.
Okay.
And that was taken into account by the body as a bit of a mitigating factor there.
Sure.
Most recently, Sydney's Riak Andrew received 5 matches, and that was just weeks before his club's Pride game.
Okay, so a very concerning pattern of behaviour across the league. We're not talking about an isolated culture problem within one club. You could argue that there is a culture problem right across the league. So we have a precedent of this behaviour. We have a precedent in terms of penalties for that behaviour. What has the Adelaide Football Club said about the incident regarding its player?
Well, in the statements released by the Adelaide Football Club since the incident, they have come out first and said that they condone any sort of homophobia in sport, and they've given the kind of caveats that we expect now from clubs responding to this kind of incident. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they've launched a major defence to the AFL, hoping to get the length of the ban reduced. At the moment, it sounds like what they're hoping for is a 4-match ban instead of 5 to make Rankine potentially eligible for the grand final should they be there. And one of the primary arguments is that Rankine faced aggressive verbal attacks from Collingwood players before the incident, including comments allegedly made regarding Rankine being knocked out by competing player Dan Houston last year when he was playing at the time for crosstown rival club Port Adelaide. He signed with Collingwood this season. Okay,
so hang on, just take me back for a second there. Yeah. We're saying that Adelaide Football Club are kind of trying to defend the slur or defend the place that Rankine was in when he made the comment by suggesting
that he was agitated.
That he was agitated because he himself had suffered a really horrific head knock last year by a Collingwood player. He wasn't a Collingwood player at the time.
Exactly.
But that he was face to face with that player and that may have stirred up certain feelings in him.
Well, that more than that the player and other players were taunting him about that injury.
Okay.
And basically kind of riling him up. To put that in context, though, of professional sport, I think that players do this all the time to each other without crossing lines that lead to being the feature of a podcast like this is today.
Yeah.
So that's not particularly unusual behaviour.
So not to take away from, the seriousness of these comments, but there was a serious head knock last year for him. But what you're saying there is, that doesn't excuse responding with homophobia.
I'm not sure that, it's up to the AFL to decide whether it does or it doesn't. What I would say, though, is that I think if you asked any sample of AFL players or players across any sport, there would be a fair bit of verbal combat on the sporting field, in the sporting arena. I think that's probably the same case for the AFLW as well. And so they're mounting that as their primary argument. Their secondary argument is, hang on, it's not the same to ban a player for 5 games, including 4 finals, as it is to ban a player for 5 games, which are just as part of the regular season.
Okay.
And that case has never been really put to the AFL before in this context. It's the first time in the context of a homophobic slur. And they're basically arguing that the nature of the games should be considered.
Okay. Puts the AFL in, I'm sure, an incredibly difficult position. But what about the reaction from players? Have we heard from all those involved?
Hello, Billy here from TDA. We have just looked at our YouTube analytics and 95% of you who are watching our videos aren't subscribing. If you want to help independent media like us grow, the best way you can do that is by pressing subscribe. Thank you so much, and back to the video.
Well, the captain of the Adelaide Football Club, his name is Jordan Dawson, he said that there wasn't a cultural issue in the AFL. He said the situation was not ideal. Those were his words. Then a senior teammate, Taylor Walker, he was on Triple M in Adelaide, and he said that Rankine is, quote, very remorseful and understands he's made a mistake and has isolated himself at home during this investigation.
Okay, so a couple of maybe contrasting reactions from within the same club. One kind of dismissing that there is a cultural issue across the league, another more directly confronting the issue and reflecting remorse. But what about Izak Rankine himself? Has he responded directly?
We haven't heard from Rankine himself. We understand that he called and apologised to the player at the receiving end of his homophobic comments. We don't know who that player is.
Okay.
But we do know there has been contact between Rankine and this player. Rankine hasn't released any statement publicly, though, at the time of recording to do with this incident.
All right. So, Sam, you've given us a really good insight into what happened last weekend, what's followed in terms of the fallout and the reaction. But I can't help but think about those string of homophobic slurs that you explained dating back to kind of April 2024, several similar incidents in the year and a half or so that has followed.
Yeah.
I guess to put it in simplest terms, does the AFL have a homophobia problem?
Well, in April, they released their first LGBTQI plus inclusion action plan. And in the front statement from the CEO, Andrew Dillon, he writes, "We know that historically the game of AFL has not always been a safe space for LGBTQI plus people. And if you look at the report overall, it clearly acknowledges that not enough has been done in the sport to make it a safe place, not only for players on the field, but coaches, staff and fans. And it outlines the steps that it wants to take to improve that." Now, I just want to bring one fact to your attention that I think holds the key to a lot of this discussion. The AFL remains the only major professional male sporting code in the world to have never had an openly gay or bisexual player, past or present.
Wow.
It's a remarkable statistic, especially when you consider that tens of thousands of players have come through the game since it started in 1897. And in April of 2023, ABC's Four Corners did a big investigation into why this is the case. And they sat down with then CEO Gillon McLachlan. And he said that there were gay players in the sport, but, quote, "the pressure and the weight of being that person, of being the first AFL player who comes out and plays as an out gay man, was too much." It is also worth mentioning that several members of the AFLW, the women's competition, which only started last weekend, are openly part of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yeah, I wanted to draw that comparison because I think it says a lot. We've got the AFLW and all of the kind of inclusive messaging around that league, that competition. It's all about visibility and empowering young girls and including as many people as possible. And then this really stark contrast of a league that is over 100 years old but hasn't yet had a player comfortable or confident enough to openly come out.
Well, advocacy organisations point to the use of pride rounds as an example here. So the AFLW has a pride round. It's in its 5th year now. And, this provides a conversation point in the season, both visibly and in the conversations happening in media and within clubs. But this contrasts to the men's game, where currently there's only a single pride game, so one game within one round, that's played each year, that's hosted by the Sydney Swans, and that's in its 9th year. So we haven't seen the expansion of that pride game format across the men's competition.
It's interesting, and I'm sure a lot of experts, a lot of people more qualified than me will have fascinating takes on, why the game is this way. But Sam, I also think to understand the culture of any sport, it can be helpful to look at the grassroots culture of the game.
Definitely.
And there is some concerning data in that respect when we're thinking about Aussie rules. There was this Australian first study I just quickly want to tell you about into the participation of LGBTQ plus youth in sport. And what we learned from that is that over half of LGBTQ plus young people have witnessed discrimination in sport. 40% have experienced it personally.
Yeah.
And a 2019 report found 73% of male amateur AFL players aged between 16 and 20 had heard their teammates using homophobic slurs.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the bigger conversation to have, and possibly its own episode of the podcast, is that we're talking about the elite level of sport, but these are are the role models of the game.
Yeah.
And we know that behaviour is mirrored through all levels of sport, way down to junior sport for kids in primary and high school.
And all the way up to things like halftime entertainment. There is a bit of a conversation going on right now about Snoop Dogg. He's been named as this year's grand final entertainment. That decision has proved to be relevant to this story.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, Snoop Dogg has a documented history of homophobic statements. And I wanted to kind of encapsulate this with a line from an editorial published by The Age newspaper in Melbourne yesterday. It says, Snoop Dogg came up through the ranks of rapperdom on a platform of sexist, misogynistic views. That may well have been the audience to which he was performing, but context comes into play here. Many are questioning the choice on a day of family entertainment.
Interesting.
And basically it makes this case that on one hand, the AFL is suspending players for homophobic slurs while simultaneously paying a large sum of money to an artist who has used similar language. Now, the AFL has come out, the CEO, and said that Snoop would perform, quote, family-friendly songs and suggested that some critics might actually be converted after the performance.
Okay.
It's not just LGBTQI plus organisations raising concerns about Snoop Dogg performing. We've also heard from violence prevention organisations with some of that misogynistic context in Snoop Dogg's lyrics too.
Okay. Not that it's funny. I was just trying to imagine Snoop Dogg performing a family-friendly version of Drop It Like It's Hot or Gin and Juice. And
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing what they come up with. Sam, this is a very serious case though. So where does this leave us? What happens next?
So the AFL is expected to announce the penalty today. These backroom conversations have been happening between the club and the code. Adelaide is expected to be given a bit of time to respond and potentially appeal the verdict. It's a bit of an unorthodox negotiation process happening. Regardless of the ban, though, we are now having this broader conversation, clearly. This is 11 years after the AFL made a public commitment to eradicate homophobia. We're seeing a trend, at least in the last 2 years, that is going the wrong way. So I guess what happens with Rankine's penalty today is of course going to be significant for Adelaide's premiership hopes, but the broader cultural issues here clearly are going to require more than individual punishments to resolve.
A fascinating story, and we'll keep an eye on it. And you can find all the updates in our sport newsletter every single day. That drops in your inbox. There'll be a sign-up link in the show notes if you want to get around that. That's all for today's deep dive. We will be back later on with your evening news headlines. But until then, have a great day.